Welcome back, my lovely owls. It's been a while, but good things are worth the wait. Today I'm bringing you a tale of adventure, a story about a group of friends who, captivated by rumors of a hidden ghost town lost to time, set off to uncover its secrets deep in the woods. This eerie town, mysteriously absent from all maps and records, was supposedly abandoned after a mysterious epidemic over a century ago. Whispers claim that those who entered were never seen again. So, before we dive in, grab your snacks, get comfortable, and don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and share. The book is called The Forgotten Ones. Chapter 1, The Hollow. Luke's voice cut through the silence, though it felt wrong, muted, swallowed by the oppressive stillness that blanketed the forest. So, why is it called Whisper Hollow? Because they say you can hear voices here, Jess murmured, her eyes darting around. But they're not just any voices. They're the voices of those who didn't come back. Milo stopped, gaze locked on something far off in the trees. He'd seen a figure, faint, just at the edge of his sight. He turned to Tara, but she was staring intently ahead, her face pale. As they pressed on, the trees grew thicker, twisted, and warped as though they were watching, breathing. Branches clawed at them, leaves whispered just out of earshot, and an unseen presence weighed down on their shoulders. It felt like they were descending into a mouth about to close. Then, finally, they saw it. Whisper Hollow. The ghost town lay shrouded in an unnatural gloom, as though the sun itself refused to touch it. Its buildings slouched against each other, leaning inward, decaying but untouched, as if some force had preserved them. The quiet was unbearable, a suffocating blanket that stilled the air and muffled their footsteps. Everything about this place felt wrong, and a chill, sharp and consuming, settled over them as they walked deeper into the town. Komor. Chapter 2, The Familiar. Jess wandered into a decrepit house, the wood sagging underfoot. Dust floated in the air, thick and heavy. As she moved further in, her breath hitched. Every step felt like sinking deeper into quicksand. In the dim light, she spotted a small, dusty photograph on a mantelpiece. She reached out, hesitating as something in her warned her to stop, to turn back and leave. But her hand moved anyway, lifting the picture. Her own face stared back at her. Jess dropped the photo, stumbling back. This is impossible. The others crowded around, horror dawning on their faces as they realized the photo wasn't just some old resemblance. It was them, all of them, perfectly posed in black and white, expressions hollow and lost. The sight filled her with a nameless dread. She could feel her heartbeat pounding in her skull, a throbbing rhythm that didn't feel like her own. Who would? Why would? Milo whispered, his voice trailing off as his gaze settled on the eyes in the photograph. They were his eyes, but they were wrong. Cold, dead, almost mocking. Let's just keep moving, Tara urged, her voice trembling. We'll get out of here, and we'll laugh about how creepy this was, all right? But as they left the house, Jess couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. She glanced back and saw the door, now wide open, and inside, a shadow. It stood there, still and patient, looking back at her. Untumber Gwanath. Chapter 3, Lost Time. That night, they decided to camp in the center of town, too tired to go any farther. As they lay around a makeshift fire, the silence returned, thick and oppressive. The air felt heavy, pressing against their lungs with each shallow breath. Luke glanced over at Jess, who lay with her back to him. "Jess, are you awake?" She didn't respond. Then her voice came, barely a whisper. "There's someone standing behind me." A chill ran down his spine. "What?" She spoke slowly, voice trembling. "I saw him in my dream, a man with hollow eyes, a face that—" She broke off, eyes wide with terror. She whispered, "Don't turn around." But Luke's curiosity overtook his fear. He turned and saw nothing but darkness. But a feeling seeped into him, dark and nauseating, as though something had passed through him, hollowing him out. He could hear whispers close to his ear, faint voices calling his name, repeating it, urging him closer. The next morning, when they awoke, Jess was gone. Her bedroll was still there, her flashlight still shining faintly, casting a weak, flickering glow over the emptiness she left behind. "What? Where?" Tara stammered, voice breaking. "She was here. We would have heard her." They searched every corner of the town, but she was gone, swallowed by the silent streets, leaving nothing behind but that empty bedroll and her fading footsteps. and all the while, a sickening feeling clawed at them. They weren't alone. Chapter 4. Echoes. As night fell again, Milo and Tara found themselves in another darkened house, torn between searching for Jess and the growing urge to flee. They opened a door, and the room seemed to shift. Warped walls, cold floors, and endless shadows that seemed to stretch out like arms, pulling them in. In the darkness, Milo felt something cold against his hand. He jerked back, looking down. A piece of paper lay in his palm, its edges frayed and worn, like it had been touched 1,000 times. Tara's breath hitched as she read the words, scrawled in looping, frantic handwriting. "You will come again. You will suffer again. You will die again." Suddenly, Milo stumbled, clutching his head as his vision blurred. He could see flashes, a twisted figure in the shadows, a young girl's scream echoing down the empty streets, then silence. He could feel the icy grip of death closing around him, the suffocating panic, the inevitable end. He was reliving someone's death, their terror, and it felt so real. When he came to, Tara was sobbing, huddled in a corner, muttering incoherently. Her face looked haggard, haunted, as if she'd aged overnight. What is doing this to us?" she choked out. But Milo didn't answer. He couldn't. He felt a terrible sinking knowledge clawing its way to the surface, as though a voice whispered in his ear, feeding him memories he had no claim to. Chapter 5. One by one. As they tried to leave, the town turned against them. Every alley they ran down twisted, leading them back to the center. Every path out felt wrong, stretching endlessly until they were dizzy with fear and exhaustion. They were trapped, caught in a twisted labyrinth that seemed to feed off their terror. Milo vanished that night, and Tara was left alone, consumed by whispers that grew louder and closer with every passing second. She could feel them watching her, feel their gaze burrowing into her, cold and relentless. She stumbled into the town hall, desperate for any way out, when she found a new photo on the wall. This time, it was just her face, her wide, terrified eyes staring back at her. Chapter 6. Eyes in the Darkness. Tara sat alone, a chill running up her spine as she felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on her. She stared into the flickering candlelight, hoping the small flame would hold back the shadows. But the darkness seemed to breathe, creeping closer each time she blinked. She felt that if she looked away for even a moment, someone would reach out from the black, a cold hand slipping over her mouth, stealing her last breath. Outside, the street stretched into shadows, quiet and still. But as she strained her ears, she could hear faint whispers, fragmented words that she couldn't quite understand, voices that seemed to curl around the edges of her mind, pressing down with an icy dread. When she closed her eyes, strange memories swam to the surface, blurring into images she didn't recognize, yet felt terrifyingly familiar. She saw herself, or someone who looked like her, standing at the edge of town, clutching a piece of parchment, hands trembling as they scratched something onto it in desperate strokes. "Don't come here. Don't let it take you." The words scrawled themselves across her mind, urgent and pleading, like an echo from a past she couldn't remember. Then the memory twisted, and she was there in that place, feeling the rough paper between her fingers, the smell of damp earth all around her. She could feel the panic in her chest and could hear her own voice whispering, "Please, please let me go." Tara gasped, snapping out of it, her heart racing. Her hand instinctively reached into her pocket, and to her horror, she pulled out a piece of paper, crumpled, stained, the ink faded but unmistakable. "Don't let it take you." "How?" She breathed, her fingers shaking. She knew she hadn't written it, but something deep inside her knew she had. She could feel a memory flickering at the edge of her mind, of running, stumbling through these streets, chased by shadows that darted in and out of the corner of her eye. The memory sharpened into the face of a woman who looked like her, but wasn't her. This woman had wide, frantic eyes and a hollow look that sent chills up Tara's spine. The woman's mouth opened, and Tara could hear her own voice echo in her head. "You have to leave before it's too late." But the woman wasn't talking to her. She was talking to someone else, someone Tara couldn't see, but felt like she should recognize. Chapter 7. The Curse Revealed. Tara found Milo, and she could see the same haunted look in his eyes. He was trembling, his gaze darting around like a trapped animal's. "I remember things," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Things I've never done, people I've never met, but they feel like my memories." He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "I remember dying, Tara, over and over. I feel it. Every time I close my eyes, I feel it." She grabbed his hand, pulling him to sit beside her on the cracked steps of the old town hall. "It's not real, Milo. It's this place. It's doing this to us." But even as she spoke, she felt the words hollow in her mouth. There was a part of her that knew it was real, a deep, gnawing dread that whispered in her mind. She could almost hear the voices, feel the eyes of the town pressing down on her. She thought back to the photograph, her own face, staring back from a time long forgotten. How many times had she looked at that same photo, only to forget, only to return again? Milo's voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "I saw us, Tara. I saw us from before." His gaze locked onto hers, and she saw the tears in his eyes, the despair written in every line of his face. "We keep coming back. Every few decades, we're brought here, forced to live this nightmare, like puppets." Tara wanted to deny it, to pull him away from the brink of madness. But she remembered her own visions, the feeling of 1,000 lives compressed into one, of each death staining her soul like ink bleeding into water. The town's curse was devouring them, erasing their memories, twisting their identities until they no longer knew who they were. She realized with a sickening certainty that every memory, every flash of recognition was part of a cycle, a trap set by the town to feed off them, draining them of hope, of self, of life. "We can't stay," Tara choked out, fighting back the tears. "We have to go before." Suddenly, a shadow passed over them, dark and heavy. It swept through the air like a shiver, sinking into their bones. Tara's eyes went wide as the streets began to shift around them, twisting into strange, impossible angles. The buildings seemed to lean closer, their windows like hollow eyes, watching, waiting. And then, all at once, the whispering started, louder this time, circling them, filling their minds with fragmented, pleading voices. "You belong to us. You always have." Chapter 8. The town takes them. Tara and Milo stumbled back, running blindly down the twisted streets, the darkness pressing in on them like walls closing in. But no matter where they went, they found themselves back at the center of town, standing before that same photograph, that same haunting image of their own faces staring back from the past. The air thickened, and Tara could feel the weight of the town sinking into her bones, filling her with an overwhelming sense of despair. She couldn't breathe. It felt like drowning, like her mind was being pulled under by an unseen force. "Do you feel that?" Milo gasped, clutching his head. It's like it's inside me." Tara did. She could feel the town worming its way into her mind, filling her with memories that weren't her own. She saw flashes of lives, hundreds of lives, all ending the same way. She felt herself becoming one of them, her own memories blurring, fading, merging with the others. Her childhood, her family, her own name, all of it began to slip away, dissolving like mist as the town claimed her. A faint voice echoed in her mind, a whisper that sounded like her own, but distant, warped by time. "You are not Tara. You never were." The realization struck her like a knife. She was becoming someone else, her identity breaking apart, being replaced by a stranger's life, another soul trapped in this endless loop. As she looked over at Milo, she saw the same horror in his eyes. His face was pale, his mouth open in a silent scream, as if he too were watching himself fade, his own sense of self melting away. She reached out to him, but her hand passed right through his, her fingers fading to nothing. The shadows crept closer, swallowing them, their identities slipping away piece by piece, and with one last, shuddering breath, Tara felt herself fall into the darkness, her memories scattering like ashes in the wind. Epilogue: The arrival of the next. In the silence that followed, the town lay empty, its streets quiet once again. The photograph on the wall shifted, the faces morphing, blurring, becoming something new. And then, in the distance, footsteps echoed, new voices, laughter ringing through the hollow streets as a new group entered. They walked in with the same wide-eyed curiosity, unaware of the fate waiting for them, the curse that lurked behind every shadow, every whisper. The town sighed, the walls settling, the shadows deepening. and as the first of the newcomers reached the center of town, a faint,